Welcome to episode 51 of the CRM MVP podcast. This is the second episode we record from the MVP Summit in Redmond 2019 style. And obviously, as I mentioned on the last episode, we're under heavy NDA. We can't talk about anything that we're looking at right here. But one of the things that I'm excited about looking at all these presentations, not just about Dynamics 365 as a whole, but I think the platform as a whole, is to think about, as solution architects and as implementers, where are our priorities going forward? Because until now, for the most part, and I'll add myself to the group, until now, when I think of Dynamics 365 or when I think of customer, requirements, I immediately think about first-party apps. I think about sales and customer service and marketing, the apps that we're used to delivering. But Microsoft has made changes that allow us to now think about, maybe a future without relying on those apps. Start from bare minimum, right? And start building up rather than taking what's in there, the complications that are in there, and then start deconstructing. So I wanted to invite a few people into the show today who are experts on this, who implement Dynamics, and who essentially provide the best practice and experience working with this. Now, obviously, granted, this is so new that no one can claim that they have 10 years of model-driven apps or whatever it is. Nobody has that level of experience, but we are now working on engagement with where, those realities essentially are in place. We're, going live with implementations that are now model-driven apps. I think even, Steve, from your perspective, you're almost exclusively working with model-driven apps at this point. For me personally, I'm working on an implementation where there's 3 divisions of a company. One of them uses pretty much straightforward sales, so we're using the primary app or the first-party app sales. And the other 2 divisions were kind of an XRM solution, so we're doing model-driven apps. We're creating model-driven apps from scratch. But I wanted to pull you guys in and talk about best practices on that. What do you do with your customers today? I want to pick your brain and also about the future, right? We see how much things have changed on the last 2 years. We talked about a few episodes ago about, what do we call it? We talked about predictions, I think it was. And one of the questions I mentioned was, if we could go back 2 years, could we have predicted what has happened on the last 2 years? And I think all of us said no. Like, there's so many things that changed. So where are things going to be a couple of years from now? But before we get started talking about that and going through your experience, how about we do a round of introductions? So I have to my left, Steve Mordew.
Okay, Steve Mordew.
Welcome to the show again. This is like show number 5 or so for you.
Yeah, something like that.
Always great to have you.
I enjoy it.
So what do you do, Steve? Why are you here?
Well, you asked me to come.
Yeah, well, that's number one. Yeah.
The topic you brought up today is really about building on top of or underneath the first-party apps.
Yep. And
we did make that transition, as you said, with our ISV solution from sitting on top to sitting underneath. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be representing that side.
Awesome. Great. Mark Smith, your first time on the CRM MVP podcast, but you have your own show, so I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. But welcome to the show.
Thank you. So yeah, NZ365 guy, and kind of, the way I see this is that Dynamics 365 is dead.
What do you mean?
I'm saying the idea of building on a first-party app, Dynamics 365, whether it's sales, marketing, customer service, field service, etc., if you're an SI, I think that day is over with starting, if you like, with that kind of Dynamics platform in play. I just don't think you need it anymore. Mitch Milam said a few years ago, don't kind of butcher an out-of-the-box entity because you don't know if you're going to need it in the future.
Right, he's mentioned this several times, yeah.
Exactly. More than ever, you don't have to do that now. You can get the same UI, same automation engine, the same integration, platform that you have on a first-party app directly at the platform level. So I'm saying, particularly the SIs, there's no need anymore to actually take a first-party app. You can build straight at the platform level.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then lastly, Kuba, welcome to the show. You also implement Dynamics for a living, and I'm curious about what you and your team are working on nowadays that we are so embedded with model-driven apps and all these new technologies?
Yeah. So guys, first let me thank you for the invitation. It's my first appearance on the show. So yeah, I've been dealing with Dynamics since CRM 1.0. So I remember the XRM times and the SDK times and all this stuff. So we do this for the living, like you said, and I agree and I disagree with Mark at the same time. So the whole goal of model-driven apps and all this platform is, of course, to allow us to build applications quicker, to offer a quicker go-to-market for our customers. And in some cases, just using the first-party app or the primary app is just the way to go. But in some other cases, I would say like probably for now in 2019, it will be like half-half. Microsoft will be too slow to deliver the proper applications and the proper value to customers. And we, as SIs and as consultants, we know probably the best. And in order to be able, to reply to the market and to be competitive with all these Apex guys from Salesforce and Oracle with their low-code and Mendix, of course, we need to talk to customers directly and build something on the platform without all these overheads and limits at the same time of the built-in apps, right? So what we do, of course, we still deal with primary apps, but we have been building like our own custom apps for years now with SDK, with XRM first, but now with model-driven apps and with CDS. So that didn't change in terms of the concept, but it has changed, and Microsoft allowed us to do it much, much faster right now with model, yeah.
Definitely. And I think, there's a lot of people who listen to the show who don't have essentially the luxury that we have of Microsoft MVPs to go and play and be at the forefront and play with this stuff and learn it as quick and perhaps even adopt it as quick as a business model like you did, Steve. So before we get into, essentially the details, can you give me like a brief explanation for someone who doesn't even know what we're talking about when it comes to starting with a model-driven app, building from scratch? What does all of this mean? So again, I'm coming from the perspective of I'm used to working with Dynamics, with the sales app, customer service app. What are you talking about when it comes to creating new apps?
So this was new, but a year ago. This has not been around long, which is why a lot of people are still getting their arms around what it even is or even hearing about it. Up until then, you built on top of first-party applications. Not that long ago, that was one big application. They started a process of separating those applications from each other, and then they can continue that process by separating those applications from the underlying platform that they ran on. The next step that they took a year ago, which is the one that people are still digesting, is they allowed us to buy a license to run on that platform underneath those first-party applications. And I think a lot of people that have been dealing with first-party applications forever were maybe like, what would be the point of that? I don't understand. Why would I not want to have all of this stuff? And the reason you might not want to have all of that stuff really has to do with what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you want to build a normal sales funnel engine with a normal lead opportunity process, you probably do want that stuff because it's already built. But so many customers over the years, starting with what was provided by Microsoft, really looked at it as, I want to build my own solution that's unique to my business. So they'd start hacking up pieces and parts and cutting off hunks of what Microsoft provided, rewriting other pieces to make their specific solution. So that's where you kind of have to look at, could I have gotten to that goal quicker if I didn't start here and shave it all down, but instead started at the bottom and just built what I needed? And that's going to vary from scenario to scenario. It's definitely not an absolute yes or no, one or the other. And there's several implications. Of course, there's a lower cost of license if you build it yourself. But,
that's right.
But you got to build it yourself, whereas in the first party, it has these things.
Deconstructing rather than building, yeah.
Which sometimes deconstructing could cost as much as building. So
that's true.
Yep. So that's in a nutshell, I think, what has happened. We were released, similar to the Force.com platform, we were released a platform license.
Yeah.
And that's been a very recent occurrence.
But if we talk about, like, especially pricing, because that is a huge piece that is very attractive when it comes to the platform licensing. I mean, if we talk about full price here in the U.S., I believe that if you get the first-party apps, I'm talking about plan level, you're paying $115 per user per month, and that is no discounts. You have less than 50 users, just paying full price. Now, the full price for P2 is $40 per user per month,
Which
right?
is that platform license we discussed.
Correct.
Yep, it's $40.
So we're talking about almost a third. It's a huge discount, right? Now, the thing is that I feel that people might think that they can take advantage of the fact that it's a third of the price, but you also cannot recreate what the first-party apps do. It's not like you can go and recreate opportunities and leads and all these other stuff that is on the sales or cases and so on and so forth.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can replace all of that if you want to. You can rebuild every bit of that.
Interesting, because again, my understanding with licensing was you can't just rebuild it, and I think it came not just from the plans, but it came from the team members. So even before plans were even out, when people thought about, well, the team member licenses are like $8 per user per month, they can access all custom entities before they were limited to 15 or whatever it is today. And people said, I'll just rebuild Dynamics from scratch with custom entities. And Microsoft said you can't do that.
But there's rebuild versus rebuild. I mean, when you look at what's packed into that opportunity entity, for example, that comes in with sales and the product catalog behind it and the quote tools behind it and all the logic behind it, you wouldn't build that because it already exists. No one would pay you to build all that. But if a customer has a need for an opportunity entity that doesn't have a need for all of this complexity necessarily.
We're just tracking deals.
Just tracking deals.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Build an opportunity entity, make it work for your customer. No problem.
Interesting.
But Steve, Gus is right from the perspective of licensing that we cannot actually replace the built-in entities with our own custom entities and pretend that they are not real opportunities or leads. So of course we need to take care of what we are building. But you actually mentioned a very important and interesting thing, because for my 15 years of experience with CRM, do you know a single customer who uses built-in product catalog? And I mean serious customer. We always build product catalog on our own. Always.
That's true.
With CPQs, with quote engines, with everything.
You change something. It's hard to use it out of the box.
Exactly, because you just cannot go to a multinational company and say you know what? Opportunity and quote requires you to have a price list, and price list is attached to one currency. Oh, really? So you always rebuild it. So we've been dealing with this, and we've been doing this for a long time. Now it was just structured, and this is now like a strategy of Microsoft and the approach of Microsoft. Maybe at least it's marketed as the approach, right? But we've been doing this for a long time right now. But still, in terms of licenses, probably the most common scenarios that you would build your app as a model-driven app are for these scenarios, like you mentioned, not covered by the built-in apps or primary apps in the way that the customer expects it. Because what implementing CRM is all about competitive advantage, right? So you cannot expect that you will go to 1,000 companies and say, you know what, we have the sales module, and go and track your leads and convert them to opportunities. I believe, for some time Microsoft thought it would be possible, right? With all these vertical templates and saying you know what, let's go with the fire and forget approach and then implement as many CRMs as possible with the built-in platform. You just can't do that, because the CRM for telco is different than CRM for healthcare. CRM for B2B is totally different than for B2C. So the model-driven and the platform is like a way for us to not finally, but a great way for us to be, again, much more competitive than others, and finally to catch up with Force.com.
When you just talked about what you just described there, where you typically build your own product catalog, your own quoting and all that. So when you pull all that out of what Microsoft provided, what is left in the opportunity entity at that point is an entity and activity connections, relationships to your IP.
Right.
There's really nothing there left. It's just a shell for that stuff. So to recreate a shell and call it opportunity, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that.
Interesting. So, Kuba, earlier you mentioned that nowadays, as you start implementations, it's sort of like 50-50. 50% of the time you do model-driven apps, 50% of the time you start with a first-party app. You, Steve, are in a little bit of a different situation, right? You guys, when it comes to ratios, what is your ratio right now for model-driven app versus first-party?
100% model-driven.
Wow.
We move the whole stack underneath.
Everything from scratch, right?
But a lot of it has to do with our target segment, too. So I know Kuba's building for enterprise customers. We were targeting that SMB customer with a simpler solution.
Right.
So we were not using much of what was
The out-of-the-box
provided
stuff.
at all.
Yeah.
Nor were we extending it with our own custom quoting or something. So for us, it was a no-brainer to drop under the stack.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Now, earlier on the last episode of the podcast, I asked a question to the new MVPs, the first-time MVPs that were here at the MVP Summit for the first time, and I said, we did an episode called This versus That, where we talked about there's two ways of doing things. What way do you go? And one of the questions I brought up yesterday was if there's a requirement, and the requirement I used as an example was, let's say when you close an opportunity, we want a project to be created automatically, so you can start working on the project. If we know we can do that with workflows, and we can also do it with flow. So we have two ways to do it. Now, I'm not adding any restrictions in terms of I want this to work in real time or anything. Let's just, make it even. Which one would you pick? And we had 10 people in the room, and we voted 5-5. 5 people said workflows, 5 people said flow. Now, I was on the workflow camp, and the main reason for that is that if I have to put my knowledge between workflows and flow on a board, or on a bar chart, the workflow bar is going to hit the roof and the flow is going to be right at the bottom. And I think I'm decent with flow. Yeah. But compared with my skills with workflows, I'm so beyond. And that's the only reason why I pick workflows today. But Ulrich, for example, said he will pick flow because it's the future. He says, looking for the future, I think this is the way you should do it. I think that once you get proficient, it would take you the same amount of time to create a flow that it would take you to create a workflow, and you're future-proofing your solution. So as we move forward into this platform thing and model-driven apps, and we know that Microsoft is making tons of investments in all of these areas, what should partners do and how do they prepare for the future? Because I think the vast majority of partners out there are not ForceWorks. They're not thinking about, look, this thing is happening. We have to get ready. We have to switch. I think the vast majority of partners, especially in emerging markets, not in the US, whatever, they are still going with sales, customer service, like same old consulting. So what can companies do to prepare? What should they know? How can they make the transition? I'll leave this for anyone.
Yes, can I add to, before Mark jumps, add to this? It's not only about skills, it's still, as for now, about capabilities. So, the saying that flow can do exactly the same thing that workflows is like a little bit lack of understanding what workflows are for. So, right. Of course, the flow is the future. But for now, if I would bet, I would go with workflow 100% of times. Absolutely.
Interesting.
Not of course, not in the scenarios that you need to integrate different systems with Dynamics, right?
Because workflows can do it.
Exactly.
Right. And at the same time, if I say...
But within Dynamics...
at the same time, if I said... the project needs to be created in real time, flow wouldn't work because flows don't work in real time, just like workflows do. So we're not we're setting the level playing field. So you could do it either way. And again, it was interesting that the voting was 5-5.
Mm-hmm. But it totally depends on the scenario. Within CRM, I would still go with workflows. If you are to integrate, flow is okay. With real time, it's still workflow. Event based, I would still go with workflow because of the real time capabilities. But of course, it will change, and we all understand that it will change. But we need to wait until flow and logic apps can do exactly the things that we expect from workflows. That's it.
I'll just add one more thing that I thought it was interesting. So another question from that episode, this versus that, was if the requirement is a chart that you can do with out-of-the-box charts and Power BI, you can do it with both. Which ones would you use? And CRM chart guy Ulrich said he would use charts. He wouldn't use Power BI, but Power BI is the future. So the argument about I'm doing it with flow because it's the future didn't really apply to charts. So that was an interesting piece. But back to the question about how can partners prepare. What do you guys recommend? Like, what are your thoughts about the platform and what should partners do to get ready for this thing?
Okay, so first of all, I'm a big believer in horses for courses, right? In other words, you can't make absolute statements as one should be used over the other. But around preparedness of partners, I think a lot of partners are not activating, if you like, their learning muscle. And so I think we've gone from a period in IT where you could train staff when they hit the bench at a certain time. You're on the bench, here's some training you should do type thing. Or there's a course that somebody's putting on and it's going to run for a couple of days or a week and you should go along and learn that course. I think those days are over for partner learning. I think that more than ever, a partner needs to develop the learning muscles of an organization. You would not, go, hey, once every 3 months, I'm going to hit the gym on a Saturday. I'm going to press all the weights. I'm going to do my squats. I'm going to do my workout. And man, I'm set for the next 3 months. We'd just laugh at somebody like that. Yet
that wouldn't work.
In the industry,
That's what I do.
That's what people do, right? Now, and of course, all you do is you end up with a very sore body at the end of that process, and the amount of knowledge it sticks doesn't really stick. And so I think we need to go to a model of every staff member, 25 minutes a day minimum as a starting point, 5 days a week, you got to be learning what's next. And I think when we look at things like Flow, PowerApps, and whether that's Canvas and or model driven, the need now is that there's so much information coming at us that if you're not flexing your muscles, you're learning muscles every day, you're getting behind. So this concept of, should you stick with the traditional, async or synchronous workflows that we have known for years that has never had a UI update, etc. Should we stick with that because we know it? Well, if it's a horse for a course, in other words, if it's the right thing for this situation, hey, that's okay. But I think the idea that I'm not going to learn Flow or I'm not going to learn the new ways of doing model-driven, and at the moment this this concept of Canvas integration, I think if you're going to think that as a consultant you're not going to learn that, I think you're making a career-limiting choice because it is absolutely the future. I think it's a future that's coming at us at a speed of less than 18 months when that future is going to be the reality. So you need to get learning now to get those muscles built so that you can take on the projects and advise our customers accordingly. Because why do customers hire integration firms? Because they expect your stuff when it comes to implementing the technology. They don't want to know, they don't want to have consultants work on their projects that knew how it used to be done. They want consultants on the project that know the best practice of how to do it now and how to future-proof their businesses.
Be proactive.
Yeah.
Now, so I think that one of the biggest fears, at least from me last year, whatever, when it was brand new, is that we have been accustomed to failures in some regard. When Microsoft introduces Marketing Pilot or Dynamics Marketing, right, and says this is the way marketing automation is going to be in the future. When Microsoft introduces Parature and says this is the future of customer service. When Microsoft introduces,
they
whatever.
download their service, my favorite.
I mean, over and over again, saying you guys need to jump on this bandwagon, spend 25 minutes a day learning this stuff. This is it. This is the future. And then they don't move forward. I think that starts to affect people's mindset and the hesitation to jump on board with technology coming from Microsoft. At least it affects me. I don't know how it affects you guys.
Yeah, you actually mentioned the point that I wanted to mention as well after what Mark said, that we have been hesitant after Marketing Pilot and all these features that you mentioned. Could have been hesitant against Flow or against PowerApps or whatever, but these technologies have been on the market for so long, and Microsoft is investing so much that nothing bad will happen to them. So that's absolutely, I totally agree with you, Mark. It's absolutely the need for us to learn that. But again, from the integrator's perspective, and again, enterprise and mid-market plus, there is a huge difference between building a future-proof solution and a solution that really, fulfills the needs for now and for today. And there is a learning curve and all these things. I totally agree that we need to learn it, but for some scenarios, we still should go with the old technologies without saying that, the old is bad. Because in some cases, as I said, the old is still better than the new one. And Flow and PowerApps and Power BI and Power Platform has been on the market for so long that we don't have to be afraid anymore that the same fate will happen or the same thing will happen that they happened to Marketing Pilot, for example, right? So that's not the case. But still, whether I think we should be learning this, absolutely yes. but don't forget about things that we already have, like this above previously mentioned workflows and synchronous, asynchronous, right?
Yeah, but the thing is that, I don't think we can dwell on history of bad acquisition choices of the past, right? There's been a few attempts to kind of fill gaps in the technology stack, which were kind of like just bolt-ons. They weren't kind of thought of as an integrated long-term enterprise type a perception. And from those past experiences, they were all purchased or acquired under a management structure that no longer exists in Microsoft's anymore.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So now, under James Phillips and Charles Lamana and Ryan Cunningham and Ryan Jones, you've got this team of guys that, fundamentally are focused on a platform that is stable, that is consistent, that is enterprise grade, that is designed to grow with an organization. And I think, one thing is becoming very clear to me is that AI is going to permeate every part of our future. And what I see of what they're doing with this, with the integration of flow and where that's going to go from a enterprise, business process engine is it's integrated across the stack, whether it's Office 365, whether it's Azure, whether it's the Power Platform. You've got this kind of set of tools that are going to continue to grow and expand as technology grows. In other words, it's going to pivot and evolve to where business is going. Added to that, businesses are becoming extremely aware of the future of AI. And I'm not talking about the marketing AI, the catchword, the phrase, etc., but I'm talking about enabling people to do their work better, more efficiently, because they're supported by algorithms that don't have bad days, don't get bored, and are consistent over time and continue to get better. In other words, work out their gaps. And I think what we're getting now with the platform, where rather than the acquisitions of the past, is this holistic environment where really any line of business application, no matter how unique it is, can be built and move your organization forward. So I think there needs to be caution about looking at the past and going, well, this is a predictor of future. Because when I look at Microsoft and look at how they play long games, whether when I started, Novell was the network operating system. What is that product now, right? Doesn't exist. Yeah. Gone. And then, Sony, PlayStation owned, the console market. Now, Xbox, number one contender, some years been ahead of the product, right? So I see Microsoft play the long game. They're not necessarily the first to the game, but they play the long game, and they generally win the long game. And I think, yes, these people have made some decisions in the past, and they've bought a few flops, but I don't see that in the direction that the Power Platform's going.
Yeah, it's a completely different animal.
Exactly. And I think leadership plays a big part in the way that's going. Right?
Yeah, so Mark, that's exactly what we said. That PowerApps and the whole Power Platform is a little bit different thing than all these failures or whatever Gus called them. What you just said, because you mentioned so many things like jumping from flow to AI. I am not that into AI as for now, and I'm totally not buying it. And there is a famous statement. I can't take credit for that. It's not mine. But if this is on PowerPoints, it's definitely AI. If this is in Python, it's machine learning. So I love it. Because for now, we just have it in PowerPoint. That's it. We are previewing the things. We have new tools. We have the new platform. We are getting ready for AI. But saying that AI will change anything in the business within the next year, not really. All the analysts and all the reports, like the down-to-earth reports, like Nucleus and all the guys, even from PwC, what they say now, that 2019 will be the year of AI slowing, and actually people realizing that AI is not the cure for everything. Finally, because we are not ready yet with all this AI buzz that this will solve everything. Whether this will be the future in 2 or 3 years of the business, absolutely yes. Analyzing sentiments, suggesting products, recommending products, next best actions, absolutely. But again, we are getting ready, and we are not ready yet.
I think Microsoft has to be a leader in that space,
and will be
for the
probably.
reputation of the company. They have to be out there on the cutting edge of those technologies. But then when I look back across the customer base, and even in the enterprise space, the number of use cases that are still being done on spreadsheets, those people are not even at the level of basic business applications. They're a decade away from even thinking about. And I think that's 80% of the market still. So when you look at just 20% of the market is even on a modern platform. And of those people, which ones are going to be ready to move forward in the near future with AI or mixed reality? That's a pretty small percentage, but you still have to be there. You have to be you have to be leading that charge.
And Microsoft is actually right now leading and will lead. But it's you also, Steve mentioned a very, very valid point. It's like with digital transformation. How can you digitize a company that has processes that are not yet digitized or does things on paper? You just cannot. So talking about digital transformation for companies like this, and I'd say 80% of the companies is probably a little bit overstatement. Yeah, but this will happen.
Wishful
yes,
thinking.
But we need to take first steps first.
Definitely. But, going back to the fact that you guys were able to adjust so quickly compared with a lot of other partners and just go 100% model-driven apps, I wonder if bigger partners, which, these global SIs or GSIs, these huge system integrators, I wonder if they are at an advantage or at a disadvantage to be able to adopt these new technologies and switch the way you did. I feel that smaller partners can be more agile and start jumping on that. And I wonder how difficult it would be for some of these larger partners to be able to make a transition.
Oh,
what do you guys think?
Clearly there's an advantage to being a small partner in agility.
Right.
There's no way there wouldn't be. I think that being able to recognize an opportunity because you've got your head looking that way instead of focused on everything else you're doing is something people need to be doing more of. I think I've always been that guy. I want to get the latest, greatest toy. I want to be on that cut. So it's just been kind of hardwired into me. If I see something new, I want to go jump into it. To the earlier conversation about flow versus workflow, I would love right now to just be all over flow. But as an ISV solution where you're building something that gets packaged and distributed broadly, right now flow requires some additional steps. Now there are things in place to solve that, but until those are solved, for me, I'm stuck. With the old workflows.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what Mark said. It depends on the situation. In your case, it's workflows is what makes more sense.
Well, no, it doesn't make more sense. It's a technical limitation
For
at the
now.
moment.
As
As soon
for
as that's lifted, we're
Absolutely.
dumping workflows like nothing doing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because, like, if I was to get involved into a startup ISV today, and I was setting out some of the rules of engagement, some of the requirements. Number one rule would be you cannot have any dependency on Dynamics 365X, whether that's sales, customer service, building an app. You're not allowed to touch that stuff unless the IP specifically needed a dependency, like explicitly. It'd have to be absolutely. There's no other way of doing it.
Justifiable.
I wouldn't touch a Dynamics 365 first-party app. Second, I would stipulate that under no circumstances could any Windows Workflow Foundation workflows be implemented in the application because of where the future of the ISV solution that I've been creating. I would say you've got to absolutely prove to me it is impossible to do what we need to do on flow, that we need to kind of revert to that old way. And same with when it comes to reporting, I would be saying the first point of reporting in this application is going to start with Power BI unless it's explicitly impossible to do what we need to do. Because I want to grow for scale, I want to grow for expertise in those spaces. And so those would kind of be prerequisites on anything I would build from an ISB perspective these days. You've got to actually justify why you couldn't build on the technology now, especially adding things like, the Power the Power Control Framework, and where that's going to go. It's really going to allow for any type of scenario to be built on the Power Platform. I think it's like the missing piece. We've heard about it in public preview, on private preview for some time, and that's going to drop soon. And I think with taking, I think if you put some of the parameters in like that, it also kind of encourages everybody to think differently. It's easy to think the old ways of doing things, and this is the whole thing about change management. Is that it's much more comfortable to do it the way we've always known. But if you're going to cut, new territory,
If
create
you want
new
to
paths,
prepare for the future, you have to.
Exactly.
But you've also got to know where we are today. I mean, that's it. You're absolutely right. If you're starting an ISV, you would want to use the latest and greatest. But if you were starting it today, you couldn't achieve the goal you just described because some of those parts aren't yet fully wired.
That's right.
6 months from now, maybe, or maybe it's a year.
And we're talking.
Months,
We're talking about it in March of 2019. So just in case they're listening to this episode,
that's also
later.
another very, very, very important point, that not the whole world is just about starting ISVs and startup ISVs. We because you guys asked about like whether the GSIs will be ahead or behind. We are not the GSI, but we have some deployments like 23 countries or 37 countries. And it's not up to us to say to the customer, you know what, we're going with Flow, we're going with Power BI. That's because this is the future. No, because 37 GMs of each countries will say like, no, we need the learning curve, we need the licenses, we need to train people. We have 7,000 users of the system. We cannot just go, although they would like to go, we would like to go, but are we behind? No, we have the knowledge, but we cannot forget about the customers. Not the whole world again is about startup ISVs. If I was a startup ISV, I would jump into Flow, Power BI, and AI and only this stuff, but you just can't.
Yeah, well, here's my fear with using multiple solutions like that, like Power BI, Flow, PowerApps, all that stuff. And I'm just playing devil's advocate from this perspective. When I implement Dynamics 365 first-party apps and I deconstruct them, read, write, product catalog, whatever, all I have to worry about is the fact that it's going to be updated every 6 months, at least right now, until they change that. If they change that, I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to worry about that. But if I'm using PowerApps, Power BI, Flow, model-driven apps, which is really Dynamics 365, which gets updated every 6 months, now I have to dodge so many bullets, or I have to worry about so much stuff because Power BI gets updated like every 2 weeks or something. I mean, it's way more often. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the uncertainty of the fact that your stuff is working on solutions that are being built? Some of them are, like you mentioned, not ready for what you're trying to do. How do you deal with that uncertainty?
You're building right now on a moving train, right?
That's right.
And it will always be moving. I mean, this idea that 6 months from now this will all be done and then we can all relax, that won't be the case, because then there'll be new things. I mean, this train is going to continue to move from forever, and we're going to always be building on a moving train. So I think it's more of a mindset of understanding that we've got some changes coming. Let's make sure we understand what they are. Let's make sure we're prepared for them. And then as soon as we take care of that, let's look out again and do it again. And that's a continuous process now with cloud, because that train's never going to stop. It will always be building on a moving train.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I wanted to achieve with this episode, obviously, is to make sure people understand that the Power Platform is super important, and that if you're not jumping on that, learning about model-driven apps and Canvas apps and everything that is out, Flow, Power BI, etc., you have to jump on that bandwagon or that train, I guess. There's urgency there. Now, going back to the conversation about the fact that you guys do 100% of it in model-driven apps today, are you doing implementations from like scratch every time, or do you load your own solution and then tweak it a little bit from there? How do you guys operate?
So in our particular case, when you start with a P2 license, right, you're getting a very thin deployment, right? You're not getting a lot of components in that. You're getting accounts, contacts, some other things. You're not getting any of the stuff that comes in with that first party app. So that's like the lowest starting point.
And by the way, what do you get with accounts and contacts and stuff? Because a lot of views and charts and stuff depend on other entities too. Like you have grids from opportunities, for example, on the account form. So
a lot of that stuff is frankly still there. But the
Interesting.
the related entities aren't there. So there's still some interesting things like originating lead and there's still stuff there, because really the motion first was let's pull out the sales stuff and leave what's behind. Another step would be to go into what we left behind and let's just clean up some of these artifacts that aren't needed. But they're not hurting anything either. In our case, that's starting point 0. And that's fine for a starting point. We built our own IP that sits on top of starting point 0 and takes it to starting point 5, and that's what we'll work with custom deployments on is a little higher starting point than that raw one, and that's what really gets you into the rapid development where you're able to build a custom solution for somebody in a matter of weeks because you've got a little bit of a starting point.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, guys. So again, yes.
Can I just say?
You want to add something
clarify?
else?
Yeah, clarify
Yes.
so that we don't leave people and listeners. Thanks, Mark. People are the listeners with a false perception, because we were talking about P2 licenses and team member licenses, and what you said about P2, that you can build everything from scratch and reflecting the built-in. Might be true with the P2 and with the platform license, but definitely, and people totally confuse that, you cannot do it. Although team members, you can of course build your solution up to 15 custom entities, whatever, per app. You cannot reflect the built-in functionality and then pretend, oh look, I'm using team member. So this is a very, very important distinction between reflecting the built-in features and trying to overuse team member license and building your own stuff on P2. Yep. So I don't want to leave people
correct.
with the
and team member is not available with P2. Yeah. Team member is part of the enterprise SKU.
Exactly.
So you have to have an enterprise license of one type to even be able to get team member.
Yes.
So they're kind of like two different layers that have their own sets of rules.
Mm-hmm. Two ways of selling, I guess, the platform and to leverage it.
Can we make the
good
reference to the competition? Unfortunately, but we need to.
Sure.
P2 is, like you said, force.com, and this is the way to think of this. This is the platform to build on, and team member is the part of a built-in solution that Microsoft offers. That's
yep. Yeah, they're not related.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, guys. I think this is a good place to end it. But before we end it, I would love to let people know how can they get a hold of you, learn more about what you're doing, hear more from you. Steve, you have a lot of great stuff happening on your blog. You have I love those calls. You just call people out of the blue and start talking to them. I love that, man. I wish I could do that. But can you tell us more? How can people get in touch with you, read your stuff?
SteveMordew.com is probably the best spot to go. Everything kind of launches out of there.
Okay, that's awesome. Mark?
Basically, NZ365 guy, with a popular name like Mark Smith. I can't rank anywhere with that name. So NZ365 guy, you find me on all the socials, and always happy and open to any kind of conversation or question you might have.
So why do you still call it NZ though? Like, why not NZ365?
Okay, so
like,
well,
you don't say Jay said.
No, true.
You say Jay-Z.
I mean, Ulrich asked me tonight, he was like, you live in London now, so are you going to drop the NZ? And like when I moved to Australia for 4 years, everyone was like, are you going to become AU 365 guy? And I'm like, I'm a Kiwi. And a Kiwi in English language, like from the motherland, it's called NZ. I know the Americans like NZ. Yeah. But, the reason the Americans have a bit of a weird language is because of telegraph service. It became cheaper to chop letters and words out, so it was cheaper to send messages back in the telegraph days. That's why you've come up with this butchered language. But we tend to stick with the Queen's English and, in little old New Zealand, so it's NZ there, and NZ365 guy. I'm here 365 days of the year.
Nice.
And I am a guy.
Good branding.
Thank you.
Absolutely. How about you, Kuba? How can people get in touch with you?
And that's a good question, because now I'm in the middle of moving here to the US. So all the content that I produce is, of course, in Polish. So crmblog.pl. That would not be interesting to your listeners, although the blog is like the biggest and the oldest blog in Central and Eastern Europe.
Though.
Okay.
So
But they know my blog probably.
yeah, they do.
It's been there on the market since 2008, and it's like really the biggest one. But in terms of new content, of course, Twitter. So Twitter with the handle Kuba Skalbania, so twitter.com, and then all the conferences that we take part usually together. So yeah, as for now, the content will be, I will be working on the new thing. I will also announce some, I don't want to announce right now, but it's a huge thing about the business blog that I was actually creating, and I also trademarked some words about it, but yeah.
Why don't you announce it now? Like, might as well just.
Come on, I
Put
need
it on the table, mate. Put it on the table. You've mentioned it.
Yes,
You
this
kind
is
of dangled the
No,
carrot.
this
I
is-
think you need to
This
get
is
it
not
out.
coming out for a few weeks.
No,
That will give
my-
you a goal to finish it.
My website is not ready for that traffic.
I'm gonna say. I want to guess kubaskalbania.com.
No, Skalbania.com is my website, so you can actually find any info you like about me.
I was gonna
But I'm
start
talking
sending
about
people
like
there, even if it's not finished.
no, Skalbania.com has been there on the market for long, but I'm talking about something totally different, like a kind of encyclopedia or whatever. The new source of content about sales and marketing and how sales and marketing actually blends in the digital world with the help of Microsoft technologies. So, but I need to be ready before I.
We got to
announce
do
it.
another episode
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
talk about that.
Yeah, that was so great that I would love to be invited again.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for joining the show, of course, and I hope to have you all back. And thank you all for tuning in to episode 49. No, this is 51,
yeah.
actually. 51 of the CRM MVP podcast. As usual, I always recommend you follow us on Twitter at CRM MVP podcast for news regarding episodes and to recommend future guests for the show. And you can always find all of our episodes at crmmvppodcast.com.